Well, that's the beginning, but the real issue here is that the federal government has declared bandits as terrorists, and it's part of the interview that you just listened to where the president said categorically, we have labeled them bandits and we have labeled them terrorists and we will treat them as such. Joining us this morning is Captain Ali Umar, who is a former Army officer and CEO, Goldwater and Riverside. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Mark.
It would seem like finally the president received your memo, right? Because you've been talking about this for a while, labeling, bandits, criminals, whatever name you want to call them, as the terrorists that they really are. How does that make you feel?
Well, first, let's say there's some relief. Some relief because we shouldn't, for any reason, brand crime along any of the following categories. You see, crime has no religion. Crime has no person. Okay, crime has no... the different nomenclatures we like to brand crime is what gets us into trouble with fighting crime. A crime is a crime is a crime, as I've always said. For example, if you went and took a life, it doesn't matter whether you were a bandit, a terrorist, a militant, an Igbo man, a Hausa man, a Yoruba man. Whatever you've just done is you've taken life, so you've committed a crime. So once we're able to take that out, you begin to see it a bit more clearly. Now, talking about terrorism. Terrorism, by any of the definitions you can give it, if it were if there was minimum requirements, for example, to qualify as a terrorist, I think those we wanted to call bandits have surpassed it. I recall at a point I was even putting it quite, sarcastically now, by saying probably they are even miffed that despite everything they've done, they are yet to get to that exalted position.
Exalted?
Yes, of course. I mean, let's talk it. I'm talking ironically now.
Yeah, I know, but
I mean, supposing we turned the table around and terrorism was something that was good, would you say by all parameters, if you had met all the conditions and you were not pronounced one, you would be happy? No. So let's turn it around again. Now that it is bad, if you've met all the parameters, why shouldn't we call you one?
Okay, now that the labeling has been done, gazetted and everything, what next? How does that differ? How does that change the approach to dealing with these issues?
Now that we've been able to call a cat, what needs to be done now is all those technicalities that actually place a leash on the ability of our security agencies to move in and do the needful fall out of place. For example, when it comes to arms procurement, there are certain weapon types that we need to fight the war. And if you go in to buy these weapons, it's not like just walking into a shop and picking what you want off a shopping list and walking out. There are conditions. And you cannot buy these weapons that probably, based on the conditions, based on your agreements, are meant for fighting terrorists, or the person who is selling it to you say, you know what, we can only use this to assist people who are in the war against terror. Then you buy it and come use it against people who are not terrorists but are bandits or insurgents or whatever you want to call them, or militants. Technically, you will be actually putting yourself in a very difficult situation. So if help can come to assuage or even take away this threat to life forms everywhere, and the condition is, you know what, the help we give you is specifically meant to fight terrorism. What do? You first and foremost look at your threat form and decide, what is this threat form doing? Has it met all the pre-requirements to be qualified as a terrorist group?
Give us examples of these threat forms.
What do terrorists do? They go into places, they take hostages, they go into villages, they challenge governments, they don't recognize constituted authority, they threaten the peace of a country, they denounce a nation. You name it, across board. History is rich with examples. And these people have not made it any easier for even those who call them bandits.
Okay. Now, you've talked about the arms procurement bit. Is
Yes.
that all there is to it? Is
No.
that all the strategy that will change?
No, that's not all there is to it.
Okay.
Declaring them terrorists, step one. Now that you have done that, we are able to get a leeway to get whatever assistance we will require, and also get that particular, how do I call it now, that particular scenario for the armed forces to go in there and do what needs to be done.
Such as? I mean, I'm just trying, I'm looking for, anything really different, remarkably different from what they have been doing hitherto. What have they been doing now? What's going to be different? Beyond,
The terrorists or the government?
The government, yes.
What the government has been doing that is different is, right from time, we've been banding, no, they're terrorists. No, they're cattle rustlers. No, they're insurgents. Okay? Let's go back to when this started. This started probably as cattle rustlers. Then from cattle rustlers, we moved to, no, do you know what? They're not cattle rustlers. They're bandits. No, they're not bandits. They're headsmen. No, they're not headsmen. That's what I meant by, listen, it's not about the toga it is wearing. It's about the act. What is it doing? If you want to go about, no, he looks like a headsman, no, he looks like a rustler, no, he looks like it. It's not about what is it doing. It's what should qualify what it should be called. Not where he is from, or who he is, or his physique, or all those, as I love to call them, nuances we allow to becloud our vision. And once we take that out of the picture, it becomes easier for the law enforcement agencies to go in there and say, you know what, this is what we are dealing with, and this is what is done about what we are dealing with. It's that simple.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me like, there are some strategies that cannot be said on air, and I do understand that. But one of the things that you say qualify these groups as terrorists is kidnapping people. As we speak, and of course, you know that Daily Trust keeps a daily account. There are those who have been in captivity more than 200 days, almost 200 days, two particular categories, are there right now. So what happens in that scenario? I mean, there have been, well, maybe there's been some inhibition as to why government officials or security agencies have not been able to go rescue these kids. What happens in that regard?
In that regard, it's straightforward. We have a situation where kidnapping is so lucrative, it is spread all over. It's not only in the north, or it's not only terrorists who will kidnap people, okay? But then you find out that these crime sets are peculiar to certain regions. Some regions are looking at terrorism. Some regions are looking at insurgents, or is it militancy? Some regions are looking at, what do you call it now? What do you call these people now? These people that go around and pick people up, and before you know it, they've used them to do rituals and what have you. Every region has its own threat genre and forms. So basically, what do we look at as terrorism? Within a particular region, we have seen how people are decimated, not only in tents, but in villages. You don't take them in tens and 20s anymore. You wipe them out in villages. And these people have given you all the nuances of terrorists. In fact, they exploit the fact that you are dilly-dallying to pose as bandits, to pose as cattle rustlers, and enjoy whatever cover they can by moving into this sector. So what do? We first and foremost declare a terrorist and deal with that problem. Now you will talk about others like militancy. You will talk like of others in other regions like kidnappers. Of course, those are crimes too. If they decide to morph into terrorism, of course, they will become terrorists too.
How does this change the mindset of the soldier on the field?
It's not about mindset. It's about leeway, it's about allowances, it's about the technicalities.
So what changes in the approach of the officer on the field to this?
Results.
Yeah.
Results. You are going in for a job. We have to take the politics. We have to take the religion. We have to take, it's just strictly military operations. You are going in to do a job, go do it and bring results. Let me give you an example out of this scenario now. There are times where you see military men torn between peacekeeping and peace enforcement. Now, there are two different things. There are two different things. But when you go into peacekeeping, what you are going to be doing there is different from when you go into peace enforcement. So what I'm trying to tell you here is, we have always known that these people are not bandits. These people you are dealing with are terrorists. And these terrorists are just exploiting the fact that you can't seem to pronounce them bandits to camouflage their terrorist acts.
Okay. Now, the part of the notice of the Gazette says, yes, consequently, the general public is hereby warned that any person or group of persons participating in any manner whatsoever in any form of activities involving or concerning the prosecution of the collective intentions or otherwise of the groups referred to in paragraph 1, we'll come back to that, of this notice will be violating the provisions of the Terrorism Prevention Act 2011 and liable to prosecution. I'm wondering what that means in particular, that the general public is any person or persons participating in any manner whatsoever or in any form of activities involving these groups. What does that mean?
I wouldn't know. But let me tell you one thing quite straightforward up front. If today people who do not wear masks become a threat, what do you do when you go to places where you need to wear your mask? You put the mask on. So it's up to anyone who wants to cross that line to go carry on and do things that are synonymous to terroristic acts in our communities wherever and call himself a kerosene seller. It's that simple.
Okay. In that Gazette, two particular groups are named. Yan Bidinga Group, Yan Tada Group, and other similar groups in the country are declared to be terrorism, and that their activities are declared to be terrorism and illegal in any part of the country. How do we identify these groups? Two have been named. Okay. How do we identify the specific groups, that are doing, things that are anti-state?
Our intelligence communities, trust me, know exactly who is involved. You, the man on the street, the average citizen, may not know who is who. And they're not going to write it on their faces that, listen, we're terrorists. No, they won't. But I trust the intelligence communities know who is who. And that is where we keep saying, take the politics and the nuances out of security operations. Okay. Let the security agencies, the armed forces inclusive, go get their jobs done. Ask them for results. If they don't deliver, we know what to do.
Okay, now,
simple.
There is also been this word around that some communities, for the sake of their own safety and security, would rather side with these so-called terrorists, or rather now labeled terrorists, than give information to the state, because over time they have found out that every time they gave information to the state, these terrorists come at them and take them out. How do people get involved when they are not sure of their own safety and protection?
That in itself is where the quandary of letting this thing fester up to this stage has gotten us. and we have to live with it and live right through it and come out of it. If we had done this 6 years up front, probably we wouldn't be here today. Talking about getting what you call the confidence of the civil populace back is it's a tough one. It has gotten to the stage where the man in that village, not the one in the township, will rather live and survive, whatever the terms are, than be killed. And he's gotten to this unfortunate situation because somehow, somewhere, we just failed to listen.
But the question is...
The question now is, how does this man get to have the confidence of our armed forces? It's not going to come like this.
Okay. Captain Ali Umar, former Army officer and CEO, Goldwater and Riverside, is still with us. A number of issues to still raise with him. But Maokwe has some questions. Maokwe, welcome back from the villa.
I got back like over 24 hours ago, Ayo. It's good to see you. And of course, it's good to see Captain Aliyu in the studios as well. Happy New Year to you, Captain.
Good morning.
Let me quickly
Same
get
here.
to the question, which I have in mind. The declaration of the terrorists, of the bandits as terrorists by the president, and of course the official gazette, which is now out. There are questions in terms of how we've handled what has happened in the Northeast, the fact that we declared the people there, I mean, not the people, of course the terrorists there as terrorists, and even how that affected our operations there. We had, there were still questions of human rights abuses, which eventually affected whether or not we were going to get weapons. So the fact that we've declared bandits terrorists in the Northwest now, don't you think that we will still run that, we could still run into the trap of how to even handle them despite the fact that they've been declared terrorists? Do you think that questions of human rights could come up in our conversation with them? And then secondly, and I'm lumping this together because of time, secondly, the issue of the safe corridor, which we've now finally established in the Northeast for terrorists who are willing to surrender. Do you think that we could, when this terrorists in the Northwest now begin to see that perhaps that has worked in the Northeast, maybe they too will begin to adopt that, and perhaps that would even soften our stance in terms of how we eventually deal with the situation in the Northwest?
What is happening now, unfortunate as it is, coming in the 11th hour, if I could say, commendable as it is too, brings on board a lot of its own concerns and quandaries. And that's why, if you heard me earlier, I said, if only we had nipped this thing early in the day, we wouldn't have all of these, you know, fallouts and, if you want to call it, comeuppance to handle. There are concerns indeed, and these concerns are such that we cannot vouchsafe much. There is, yes, we have declared them bandits, or sorry, we've declared them terrorists because what they are doing aligns with acts of terrorism. Yes, the questions you've raised are potent ones too. How do we handle those that have already been caught and they have been tried? All of those are potent, yes. It's left for the government to actually find how they're going to handle that. It's still part and parcel of the luggage we have been able to put up, and we must carry and move on. How they're going to do it is left to them, and at this point in time, I think, even though it's the 11th hour of things, the most important thing is we've been able to bail a cart for once, and having bailed that cart, we move on to other aspects of what you can call the effects as they come. There will be immediate, there will be mid-term, there will be long-term effects, and we must live with it. So that's straightforward.
You talked about the other time, just very, very quickly, about how do we re-engage the people? How do we buy back the trust that we have, that has dissipated over time? Very, very quickly.
That is a job that is going to be done mutually by our leaders and our armed forces. Our armed forces must understand something. Security, as I've always said, is not about pandering to the interests of any party or any particular people. When you go into security operations, we don't know religion. We don't know tribe, we don't know tongue. We only know the act. What has he done? Is it right? And for the politicians, I've always said it and I'll repeat it again. Stay out of security operations. Now, the thing is, you're going to ask me how. It's simple. Appoint whom you will, give him his marching orders. If he doesn't give you results, change him.
Well, it's
that straightforward.
It looks that straightforward, but then getting it done as straightforward, that perhaps is another conversation altogether.
That's the 5 and 6 effect. If we want to do it, well, we can do it.
Yeah.
We're not the only country on the planet.
Absolutely.
And things are happening democratically in other countries, and militaries are being engaged, and they're doing a wonderful job of things.
Well, so many questions that I would have loved to ask you, but there's so much to handle this morning, because I would have wanted to ask you, okay, now that this has been done, how soon before we begin to get results? Don't answer that one yet. At that time, I will have you here, Captain Ali Umar, former Army officer, CEO, Goldwater and Riverson. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, there are still a lot of reactions to what the presidency has done in the past 1 year. That's next on our agenda. Please stay with us.
My fellow countrymen and women.
The year began with strong declarations by the president designed to reinvigorate hope.
We saw this year put to test our national resilience.
The president illuminated 3 focus areas for 2021: security, the economy, and anti-corruption. Events that unfolded days after was a testament that the president was out to translate those words into action, beginning with the appointment of new service chiefs, and his mandate to them was to address the surge in insecurity. Every year typically has a few defining moments, and the last one was no exception. The federal government took delivery of its first batch of AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine on March 2, and President Muhammadu Buhari was among the first persons to receive the jab, primarily to quell nationwide hesitancy. If the event of the first week of March was a high watermark for Nigeria, the spate of abductions that followed in the days after certainly doused it. The federal government promised that the over 300 student abduction in Zamfara would be the last. But months down the line, reality hit differently, raising questions about the military strategy.
To solve the problem of insecurity effectively, you need to cut off the supply chain. What is the supply chain? Poverty and unemployment. If you don't deal with that, even if you have all the technologies in this world, it will be compromised.
The president swung into more action by April, convening several security meetings, ordering the service chiefs to identify leaders of the bandits and proposing 396 billion naira for the procurement of additional military hardware, as well as COVID-19 vaccines. These steps were taken as the nation was exiting her second recession in 5 years. The weekly Federal Executive Council meeting was held virtually for most of the period under review. It gave major approvals, including a 20% upward review of police salary, the tax credit scheme to boost infrastructure, approval of the National Development Plan, $1.5 billion contract for the rehabilitation of the Port Harcourt refinery, as well as $1.48 billion for that of the Warri and Kaduna refinery. Other major presidential assents and approvals include the signing of the Petroleum Industry Bill into law in August, the 2021 Finance Bill, 982 billion supplementary budget into law as the president withheld assent to the Electoral Amendment Bill. Less than 2 years left in his administration, President Buhari made several international visits to the United Kingdom, France, Turkey and New York for the United Nations General Assembly, where he championed calls for more support towards addressing corruption and insecurity. In a most assertive move, the president, by the second half of 2021, sacked 2 of his ministers, that of Power and Agriculture, for the first time since 2015, and subsequently took time to review the performance of each ministry.
You must bear in mind that the National Economic Council, your governing council, and Nigerians as a whole will hold you accountable for this mandate.
The last 1 year has contained so many paradigm-shifting developments that has continued to redefine the country's activities. In 2021, it was for the first time we saw the president consider giving pardon to IPOB leader Nnamdi Kanu and also a posthumous pardon to 9 Ogoni activists, including Ken Saro-Wiwa, 26 years after they were executed. Again, in keeping with his promise to maintain a January to December budget cycle, the president signed the 17.126 trillion naira 2022 appropriation bill into law, even though it was with a lot of displeasure over major changes made by the National Assembly. With less than 17 months before the current administration wraps up, what critically resonates for the presidency is effectively continuing with the fulfillment of the 3-pronged mandate of quelling insecurity, tackling corruption, and lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty through a thriving economy. From the presidential villa, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
Well, that was a summary of the presidency in 2021 as put together by our correspondent, State House correspondent Gloria Umezuke. And basically, it summarizes a lot of the activities, highlights of the president's activities in 2021. We're now going to be reviewing that with a professor of political science, Professor Ayandiji Aino, who is the provost, College of Postgraduate Studies at Babcock University in Ogun State. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm sure that you were able to at least get some pointers from that particular report. How would you assess the president's tenure in well, maybe not the tenure will be 4 years, but how would you assess how the president carried out his activities in 2021?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your having me on the program. Assessing the president for 2021 will take us to the point of what the president is trying to do at this point. And that is to say, the president in 2021 acted in the like manner of the previous years since he started the first tenure. And that is what he himself called to go slow and steady. And that has not solved any problem in our nation. So 2021 was also almost like ending up on a sluggish note in terms of developmental accomplishments, both in the polity, in the economy, and everywhere.
I want to take a look at the 3 cardinal objectives of the president when he came into office in 2015 and also in 2019. It hasn't shifted much. He promised to tackle corruption. He also wants to boost the economy and trying to remember, and security, which is on the front burner. For this, if we were to assess it, strand by strand, taking these 3 major sectors, let's start with security. For you, what major landmarks would you say stand out in terms of how the president executed his work in 2021?
I think the president, understanding the president's approach in solving the security challenges and issues of Nigeria, we have to come to grips with the nature, the character, and the purpose of the state itself. And then what is the finality? under this president, the nature and the character of the state remains the same. That's Nigeria is a rentier state, built on compromises and patronage and all of that. And like some of the other previous people who have spoken on your channel have all recognized, when you have a nation that is run, that is predicated on patronage, and you politicize almost everything, then you won't have much milestone that you can account for. So the political economy of security in our nation for 2021 is that which, largely dependent on patronage, trying to politicize what's supposed to be a pure military affair. And the president was, saying, largely speaking, even since the beginning of his, tenure, second and first tenure in office, to be very reluctant in taking public opinion, even when it becomes very obvious. Change your minister, change your service chief, do something. All we can see is that the president has taken too much time into pumping money into security, but there's very little that we can see. Buying the Tucano, the Tucano, jet fighters were booked some 1-2 years ago, delivered, but we have not seen much as we expected. There's so much expectation of this Mr. President that is making a lot of people in the country to feel uncomfortable. The point is that you may have delivered on some other areas, but when security is almost, below average, you may not be able to seriously account that you have solved the problem, the very reason why you were elected as the president. That's why so many people are either uncomfortable or aggrieved or provoked to saying so many things unprintable about Mr. President, and he's the standard bearer anyway.
Well, I do know, just a few days ago, I was privileged to have a conversation with the president. I do know that he'll dispute your observations. For instance, he did talk about the Northeast, where he believes that, we have recorded a lot of progress. He made reference to 18 local governments that used to be under the control of terrorists, which is no longer the situation. We know that in Borno State specifically, government IDP camps are closing down and people are being asked to return home. And in many instances, they are returning. Some that are not even returning are at least staying in the city of Maiduguri and are trying to eke out a living. And so that is a pointer to progress in the Northeast. He acknowledges that there are challenges in the Northwest, but he says that that's the reason why they have declared the bandits there as terrorists, so that can facilitate the work which they are doing. And I'm sure that you must have listened to the security analyst who spoke to us earlier in terms of what effect that would have on the battle against terrorism and banditry in general in the Northwest. So for you, do you think that brings some confidence into whatever criticism, we might have seen in 2021 as we move into 2022, that perhaps the security situation could indeed get much better?
Yeah, it depends on how you want to look at it. For me, what the president has achieved is nothing more than what you can reduce to tokenism. You may say on paper, when you go on social media, you see a lot of people talking about is the achievement practical, is it audio? The point they are making is not that we have not seen some little changes here and there and efforts, but there's so much that is expected of Mr. President. That's the point that we should not, gloss over. If you look at the indices of assessing whether we have achieved or not, yeah, some of the ID camps have been emptied out. There are developments in Borno, usually with the governor, the professor governor over there. But the basic indices of security assurance that the nation is coming out of the woods are really not there. We never can say point blank that those local governments are already freed from bandits or whatever, because we also read in the news that some locations in our country have people paying rent and taxes, in quotes, to these bandits who have taken over their neighborhood. In Niger State, which is just a border nation to Abuja, the federal capital city, we have also read of the governor's concerns about two local governments that are already largely infiltrated by bandits and these unwanted elements of our society. And the fact that Abuja-Kaduna Road is perpetually unsafe, it's almost, turning out to an ungoverned territory. It speaks a lot about what we have achieved in terms of military progress. We see that a president that we have on chair is somebody who has in the past, according to the history available to us as scholars, who achieved in the past when he was a commander on the field, especially even in the northeast. But that is not the case now. We expect by now that declaring bandits as terrorists is coming almost too late, but it's better late than never. All of those activities that are coming out shows a president who said he wants to move slow and steady. And moving on slow and steady is not answering to the urgency of the need of a nation that is bleeding in the face of bandits, terrorists, Boko Haram, and kidnappers and all of that. We need a president who will act with vigor more than what President Buhari is doing currently. That is why, even with what I call tokenism of achievement, we cannot give him any credit. We need to be totally sure. I cannot, even in the Southwest, there are areas that that many of us, let me not personalize it, that many people have, decided not to bother even going home during these festivities, So, but that is not to say that in other areas, like the president mentioned in your interview with him, the Lagos Ibadan, some of those other ones, we see that is good. I was in Ibadan during the Christmas, New Year, and it took me almost just 45 minutes. While what I call tokenism in the area of achievement of our president can be noticed, for instance, Lagos and Ibadan Expressway is now, fairly, almost completed, and you can have a nice drive-through. But the point is that the primary essence of governance is the security of life and property. Then other things will follow, as it were. And if the country is not largely safe, then every other thing is nothing but tokenism. That's exactly what the point I was trying to make, that the president needs to go beyond the call of duty and change pedal from slow and steady to be on the super highway. I hope the last 1 year can be used to still leave an impression in the mind of Nigerians about the outcome of his presidency for 8 years. We need to, maybe with the declaration of these bandits as terrorists, and the urgency of the need of people around him, to leave a legacy. Maybe something can still be left, but we are far gone in the day, almost 7 years, an 8-year administration with very little to account for in terms of security. And that overrides every other consideration, economic and diplomacy and all of that.
Those who have this belief or opinion that politics seems to play a lot of role, a significant role in how governance runs. And that, to a good number of people, have affected the economy, security that you mentioned. Consequently, people refer to political will or a lack of it in getting a number of things done. From your assessment, would you say, how would you, position that, the role of politics or politicking in taking important decisions that affect 200 million Nigerians, especially in the year 2021 under review?
There seems to me to be some form of lethargy in government at the center. It's a little bit of lethargy, which is what you call politicking. You know, the president himself in the interview with two of your distinguished colleagues said that he's going to do as much as the system can allow. That's like a surrendering, you know, to fate, in my opinion. I think the president is elected to be president, and he has to take the bull by the horn. Every idea about dilly-dallying and changing security chiefs when there is need arise, you know, everybody will have to shout hours before the president will take action. You know, even in starting out the administration, it took almost 6 months or something to appoint ministers. You know, all of these tendencies have, you know, impacted negatively on the accomplishment, you know, of this Mr. President. Mr. President, you know, came into power on a high, you know, pedestal of people believing that we have not seen somebody who will do something tangible. You know, the expectation may be running too high, but the president may not have done the best in meeting up that need in terms of his approach of being slow and steady. Like it's been said, there's no room for politics in matters of security. When the president's body language appears to look like you are thinking about the people who are largely involved in banditry and Boko Haram and all of that, before you would take very strictly military, you know, action or policy direction, it leaves much to desire. And that's the problem that we're having with Mr. President as his subjects. And that's why so many people are now thinking, you know, even the extremities of trying to, you know, talk about how to get away from this entity called Nigeria. You know, and the president, from the interview you had with him, you know, published yesterday, said that those who are looking to get out of the nation called Nigeria, he said they're only looking for the best deal. You know, that kind of a mindset trivializes the basic necessity of life. You know, somebody said, as the president, what has the president done in cutting away the supply chain of this security is something we have in place. Many people now, since they can't see any government around to help them, they will easily, you know, overlook reporting these guys to the security outfit, because reporting them, you may be exposing yourself to further danger. So they are left between the deep blue sea and the devil. So the choice will be now to just dance to the whims and caprices of these unwanted elements, and the society is slipping into largely ungoverned, pockets of ungoverned territories around our nation. It's not acceptable. Yes.
My apologies. Does that, all that you have said about the political will and all, politicking, does that have any role to play or any influence in the relationship of the presidency or the federal government with the states, the subnationals? You know, of course, in that interview, the president referenced some conversations with some governors that he had to send them back to go and address those issues themselves. Is this anything to do with that, or it's a different issue altogether?
Talking about intergovernmental relations in Nigeria is almost zero, you know, because the governors, whether of APC or PDP or wherever, or ABGA, in the only state where they have, they've not done, you know, much in terms of interfacing with the government at the center. And of course, there's pointing of accusing fingers here and there. The president is talking about what the governors are doing with the local governments. You know, they have been totally, the government at the state level, they have taken over the local government. I don't even think, as a political scientist, that I can refer to what we have in Nigeria as local government, because they have taken over everything that the local governments are supposed to do, and their budgets have been over, you know, taken by the state chief executives, and they have got little or nothing. They just put some stooges, you know, puppets in place who will bear the name local government chairman and all that. So intergovernmental relations from local to state to federal, in my opinion, is almost nil or zero. And that's, you know, speaks to the dilemma we find ourselves as a country and the security challenges that are now exacerbated.
Well, Prof, thank you so much for your time this morning and the perspectives that you've been giving us on the an assessment of the presidency in 2021 and looking forward to the home run, which is 2022. Professor Anyodiji Aina is Professor of Political Science and Provost, College of Postgraduate Studies, Babcock University, Ogun State. Thank you once again, Prof, for your time this morning.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a good day.
You too. Well, part of the responsibility of the president or the presidency over the past 1 year and even now is that of the budget. And the 2022 budget is already active. What are some of the contents? We'll bring that up when we return. Stay with us.
Thank you very much. You may be seated.
Days after President Muhammadu Buhari signed the 2022 budget into law, the Minister of Finance is leading other government officials to discuss the workings of the budget. She starts by giving the major highlights of the 2021 budget performance, which she pegs at 94%.
As at November 2021, federal government's aggregate revenue was 5.51 trillion. This represents 74% of the prorated target. The federal government share of oil revenues was 970.3 billion, representing 53% performance prorated target for the oil and gas revenues.
For the year 2022, there are ambitious plans following the presidential assent to the finance bill. This will introduce new tax reforms to fund the nation's budget deficit of 6.3 trillion naira. Plans on how to finance the 2022 budget deficit servicing model are also being worked out.
There is a law now that has imposed duty on non-alcoholic carbonated sweetened beverages. So there's now an excise duty of 10 naira per litre imposed on all non-alcoholic carbonated and sweetened beverages. And this is designed to, one, discourage excessive consumption of sugar in beverages, which contributes to a number of health conditions, including diabetes and obesity, but also this new sugar tax is introduced to raise excise duties and revenues for health-related issues and other critical expenditures.
The sectorial breakdown of the 2022 budget shows defense and security still tops with 2.29 trillion naira, which is about 2 billion naira lower than the proposed 2.4 trillion naira by President Muhammadu Buhari. Infrastructure is now 1.42 trillion naira as against the 1.45 trillion naira proposed by the president. Health is now 876.3 billion naira, which is higher than the 820 billion naira presented by the president, while education is now 1.23 trillion naira as against the 1.29 trillion naira proposed by the president. The budget deficit stands at 6.3 trillion naira, while debt servicing is over 3.6 trillion naira. The Minister of Finance addresses concerns over the increasing cost of debt servicing in Nigeria.
At 3.61 trillion, debt service is 21% of the total expenditure of the 2022 budget, and it is 34% of the projected revenue of the 2022 budget.
In all, the federal government hopes that this budget reflects the economy, which has been affected by COVID-19 pandemic, insecurity, and dwindling investments.
And that's precisely where we're going to be looking right now. Dr. Emeka Okengwu, who is a development economist, chief executive officer, and Hill Concepts Limited, and also former member, National Technical Working Group Committee of the Vision 2020 project, joins us in our studios. You're welcome, and Happy New Year to you, sir.
Happy New Year, my boy. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I do not know whether from what you see, the projections of what we intend to spend in 2022, 2021, coming from how we did and how we fared with the budget in 2021, will truly give Nigerians a Happy New Year. Do you see that from the breakdown as put up by the Minister of Finance?
Well, I think that the first thing to do is to recognize that the president, for the first time in a long time, have raised issues. He signed the budget, but he has also said, I am not going to operationalize this budget until we resolve some very thorny issues. And these issues are heavy, because as these 400 billion add up, there's the issue of the sinking fund, and then there are the reductions from very critical MDAs like energy, transportation, agriculture. I mean, I think energy, they're yanked off about 14 billion, transportation about 15 billion, agriculture about 12 billion. And he says, you haven't explained this to me, and these are very critical. And then he talked about even the reductions from the Navy and police funds. Now, these things are key. So, except you're going to be operating or having this conversation on the assumptions that this has been resolved, I don't think it has, and they are key. But if we are going to say, okay, let's keep that aside and then, work with what it is we have, I'd rather not look at the figures. I'll look at the sections. Okay, we're talking about the formal economy and we're talking about the informal economy. For the formal economy, yes, it's going to run. Okay, it looks promising. But unfortunately, over 80% of the population is in the informal economy. And this is where you need to begin to now look at how you can begin to build inclusiveness. And I think that is where the challenge of this budget will be for me. Because those agencies, those MDAs that are supposed to be creating this inclusiveness, being able to create this synergy between the formal and informal sector, are now the sectors that are gaps in. Last time I listened to the Minister of Transportation and NTA, he was talking about, needing to raise $36 billion to be able to conclude, the transport infrastructure needed or the stock needed in the country. And then this is a ministry you're removing about 14 billion, from their budgetary allocation. And the man kept saying, it's not even about me borrowing. I can't even find this money to borrow. So I am going to be working with what it is that I'm going to be getting from the national budget. So these are where, for me, and the president keeps emphasizing on agriculture and emphasizing on going back to the land. And I'm saying, yes, the interpretation of going back to the land might not necessarily, mean take hoe and digger. It means go back into productivity. That's how I read it. And if I read it correctly, then I think what the president is actually saying is, let us get more innovative in trying to be able to solve, our agricultural and food production, food security needs. And this is where technology also comes to play. And I glanced through the allocations to the Ministry of Science and Technology, a capital of about, I think, 143 billion. But now when you look at these critical sectors, these critical areas that allow them to begin to now deploy research outputs, that allow them to now begin to, get into the local governments or communities to begin to, actually get innovative. You find budget lines like 20 million, 7 million, and then you begin to wonder, if we are really in sync with what I might be able to call our socio-economic realities.
Well, there are so many questions. And when you look at where we are vis-a-vis our infrastructure and the needs that we have, almost every area looks critical. Is it health? Is it education? Is it infrastructure? Is it security? So many areas, and every single one of them needs funds to be able to move, so as it were. And sometimes it would seem that some other, less critical they appear less critical, tend to take the hit. For instance, science and technology, etc. But let me quickly flip this to Lagos now, because I understand that my colleague Ayo has another guest in the studio.
Thank you, Markwe. We have Kenneth Erikume, who is a tax partner, tax reporting and strategy at PwC. He joins us here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let me just speak to your part of the whole idea, which is tax. On the front pages this morning, we have a situation where, of course, the minister also said it, that there is a 10 naira per litre tax on soft drinks. It will seem like every opportunity to tax everyone is just where it is. That is beyond the provisions of the Finance Act, which also, amends a good number of laws. First of all, your assessment of all of these and how they are likely to impact everyone. Let's begin with a general overview.
Right, so thank you very much. I think the first thing to realize about our budgeting is that while it looks like 17 trillion is a lot of money, comparing it with other countries, it's not a lot. It's actually peanuts. If you do an assessment of that, with our population size, and do a division, that would be about 85,000 naira being budgeted for every citizen of Nigeria for the full year. If you contrast that with a country like South Africa, where the budget of the central government is about 2 trillion rand, in naira terms, that's about 60 trillion naira. Compare that with 17 trillion. And their population size is about 60 million, which means that, for each citizen of South Africa, the budget is about 1 million naira. Compare that with 85,000 naira being budgeted for every Nigerian. So in the context of that, that looks like, in relative terms, the budget is not so large. And therefore, in terms of the impact, which we've seen year on year, the impact is not significant. However, one of the things you would also notice is that even though the expenditure target, which is about 17 trillion, is a lot, on the revenue side, we're still not able to catch up. Because the revenue that is being projected is about 10-point-something trillion naira for this year, which gives a deficit of about 6.4 trillion naira. The implication of that is that you would have to borrow to fund that deficit. And if your revenue does not improve, you'll be in that vicious cycle of borrowing consistently.
And that I think is something that's concerned a good number of people over time. And one of the issues some people have raised is, look, it is simple economics. Cut your clothes according to your cloth, not according to your size, because your size, you don't have enough cloth to make a cloth for yourself. So for those who are saying, let's cut down on governance or on government spending or governance spending, the recurrent expenditure and all, do you see a chance that that can even be considered?
So not at the moment. From the presentation of the Minister of Finance, it was clear, and I think it's been consistent with this administration, that restructuring of payroll and downsizing is not going to be an option. That also has its own economic impact. If you're going to be, people are losing their jobs, it means that the economy would be depressed eventually because people will not have enough income to spend. I think what we need to focus on as a country is not necessarily the size of the recurrent expenditure. In my opinion, what we need to start looking at is the quality of the output from that recurrent expenditure.
Do you see that matching?
I don't see it matching because when you look at, government services generally, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of, and you compare that with when private sector individuals are involved in those services, there is a huge gap between what government is able to deliver and what should normally be delivered. So I think that quality in terms of government services and value is what is fundamentally lacking, because that's what stimulates the private sector.
Which then raises the questions that a number of people are asking about, look, if we are not getting value for money, we're not getting quality for the spending we're doing, and you want us to pay more tax, why should we trust the process? We'll come to that when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. We're still talking about an assessment of the 2022 budget breakdown. Kenneth Erikume is still here, tax partner, tax reporting and strategy, PwC. I have two issues to raise with you before we go back to Abuja. So we wanted to answer that question. Why should people pay more when they're not getting value for money?
Okay, so I was building, and one of the things that you would notice is that our debt service to revenue ratio is quite high, which means that for every cash flow that the government generates, a lot of it goes into debt servicing. If you were looking at a company, the company then needs to generate more revenue to be able to fund or service that debt. And I think that is fundamentally the focus. However, it has been said that Nigeria has some of the lowest taxes across Africa, but that is not exactly correct, right? At the company's income tax level, 30% is quite high compared to other African countries where you'll be seeing about 25% tax rate. And in addition to 30%, we have education tax of 2%, and we have other taxes. Nigeria is one of the countries where we have minimum tax, which means that if a company does not even make a profit, it's supposed to go and borrow money to pay minimum tax. And then we've also introduced the significant economic presence rules, which means that, if services are being provided from outside Nigeria, there's a withholding tax of 10%. And digital companies also have to file returns and declare their profits in Nigeria. So by any standards, from a company's income tax perspective, we're not a low tax jurisdiction. For VAT, where we say, VAT rate is one of the lowest in Africa, 7.5%. It's actually the lowest in Africa in terms of rate. But in terms of implication, it's not, right? In other African countries, when you incur cost and you suffer VAT at whatever rate it is, it does not form an absolute cost. You're able to recover it when you're charging your customers. But in Nigeria, that opportunity does not exist in the law. It's almost like a sales tax, because the only time you're able to recover your input VAT on your purchases is when you're a manufacturer, you buy goods to manufacture or you buy goods to sell. So, for example, your TV station, every single cost that you incur, automatically that VAT becomes an absolute cost. That's not the same way in other jurisdictions. So it has a cascading effect, which means that 7.5% ultimately is not that low.
You're making it sound like the private sector is doomed.
Not exactly. So I was happy to see that the Minister of Finance presentation, even though she spoke about the comparative tax rate, also mentioned, the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative and outlined some of the things that government is doing. And when I looked at it, many of them were not about raising taxes or introducing new taxes. Okay. One of the things which mentions and resonates with me is to increase the capacity of government to administer the taxes and make it easier for taxpayers to compute and file their tax returns using technology for profiling and discovery of taxpayers, reviewing incentives, because that has formed, significant leakages in government over time, where incentives are granted, but they're not monitored. They're not being monitored around what is the impact on the economy and the value it's creating. Okay. So those are some of the strategic revenue growth initiatives that she mentioned. But the one which you mentioned, which I think a lot of people are scratching their heads about, is that 10 naira per litre tax, which was introduced for soft drinks. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know where to go about that. But and I know your position about the question I'm about to ask. So let me throw it to Dr. Emeka Okengwu just before Malkwe takes over. So, Dr. Okengwu, there's this statement ascribed to the president of the AFDB, Akinwumi Adesina, who says, while tax rates are relatively low in Nigeria, it simply is not an excuse to keep increasing taxes. In Norway, tax to GDP ratio is 39%. Singapore's tax to GDP ratio is 13.2%. Nigeria's tax to GDP is 6.1%. But in Norway, education is free through university. Singapore today has 100% access to electricity and water, and it went on and on. What would be your own take on especially the tax element of this budget in the light of what Professor Adesina has said?
Well, I think what's key for us to understand is that government needs taxes to be able to operate. That's how they earn income. But in also introducing taxes, you must also make certain that the social services that can be able to encourage you to earn the taxes are available. And this is where I think we have the challenge of taxes. And this is where it's beginning to look as if people are being overtaxed and that government is not showing compassion. Remember that the economic sustainability plan is been all about throwing money at problems, trying to see how you can be able to get, companies back on their feet again. And from what the CBN is hinting at, maybe by March of next year, a lot of those loans are going to be called back. Unfortunately, Nigeria is not a country where you have patient capital, where you have government being able to support you with capital that is not debt. So, and 80% of the times you throw this money against, you need to now start building your own infrastructure. You need to now start providing your own critical, especially energy, security, even roads where it comes. So it makes the tax thing a little bit more of an academic exercise, if you may, than something that you can be able to really feel. It becomes very difficult for you not to want to, even if the tax was to be 2%, you still see a lot of challenges against paying. And this is because government, in expanding its tax nets, has not also been able to equip those sectors that can be able to now engage or open up the windows for new opportunities, new jobs to be created. People are losing jobs. And again, in all this, I think what even worries me more is that we have not captured the fact that COVID-19 is getting worse. It's not getting any better. And it is something that it doesn't give you a plan. There's no program. Look at government now saying to you, maybe by sometime this month or so, if our policy kicks in, you're not able to enter into any government office or do government business if you're not showing your tax result or you have not been vaccinated. This is going to kill a lot of businesses too. And we're not understanding that, yes, we might have gotten out of recession, but we had a mixture of what you could call a recession and a depression. Okay, whereas you can say the formal economy, recessed. I mean, the informal economy got into total and complete depression. So the tax thing is for me, is very thorny. It's something we need to walk. It's a line. It's like putting us, between the rock and the hard place. Wherever it is you go, like they say in the military, is a catch-22 problem in Nigeria.
Even for government, I mean, if that's for the citizens, even the government might also feel that way as well, because citizens will continue to ask which one will come first, like the chicken and the egg situation. Must infrastructure improve first before citizens will be willing to pay more taxes? And if that will be the answer, by how much must infrastructure improve? Because government will say, at least in some areas, they're beginning to see progress in terms of infrastructure being deployed or being built in those areas. But I'm wondering, one of the first ones we have seen, one of the first immediate areas where government is looking to increase the sources of income is through excise. We've seen a 10 naira excise duty slammed on every litre of carbonated and sweet drink, so to speak. And they say it's because they're also trying to reduce the incidence of diabetes and obesity. Now, when you look at how that is supposed to go into health, which is another social, supposed to be a social infrastructure and investment, and where our health system currently is, some people also find it difficult to tell, but how do you think this will immediately impact those who are dealing in the business of food and beverages?
The first question will be, at what point do you collect the tax? This will be the challenge. And what infrastructure do you have to be able to calculate? Do you pay at the point of sale or do you pay at the point of production?
Wherever the tax is paid, wouldn't it be ultimately transferred to the consumer?
That's what I'm saying, that the final victim, if you may, is going to be the consumer. If you're going to say pay at the point of production, okay, and you're going to say pay at the point of consumption, the point of production might be a little easier for you to be able to pick it up, because all you need to do is to be able to check, the volume. Okay, but again, remember that most of these beverages are also imported, and they also come with, taxes that they pay. So what they're just simply going to do, and you don't have a regulated, pricing system in Nigeria. So you're going to be having people bringing these things, and then it's going to be messy. I think the proper thing government must look at in trying to run this country is to recognize that, one, a lot of indicators that they have put into trying to operationalize this budget has been put in some kind of storm, if you may, with the infractions or what the president had said he noticed was wrong, and that these are questions that need to be answered. And then when we keep talking about the government agencies that are supposed to be generating these revenues, if you look at it, I mean, the figures that are actually looking at is about 1.something trillion, and you mentioned excise. Now, excise only comes when you have goods and services coming in. All right? In Europe now, I know for certain, in a country like Spain, about 18 of their shipyards have been shut down. A lot of these businesses are closing down. Manufacturing businesses are closing down. What you actually see excelling now are businesses that now operate in the virtual world. Yes, they have put in some kind of taxes for people who are even operating in that digital space. Mm-hmm. But are you going to be able to, again, do you have that blockchain infrastructure? Do you have that back infrastructure to be able to now, also monitor and be able to get your payments? Mm. And then if you do, what percentage would that be as against the goods that are going to be coming into your seaports?
But at least the first thing is to identify it. Identify these areas where you can actually get tax from.
It's been there, Mawe. It's always been there. I mean, it's not a new area. Excise duties have never been a new area. I mean, the customs made, I think, over 500 billion.
No, it's when you talk about the ICT.
Okay, the ICT.
Yes, the ICT area. I mean, some people will say that we had overlooked that. Maybe the fact that other European countries are beginning to look at the social media giants, that we are now beginning to say, oh, wait a minute, we can also look there as well. So it's a good thing that we're identifying those areas as places where we can increase our sources of revenue. But in terms of excise for food and beverages, particularly sweetened and carbonated drinks, the question will be, haven't they been doing that before? And why should it be such a big deal? In terms of being able to get their taxes
and it's not as if they're saying the 10 naira they're going to be putting on is going to be put inside a fund that will now support health, research.
That's what it seems they're saying. That's what it seems they're saying.
That's what it seems, but that's not what it is. Because if it is, then that fund should be created. Like we created the PTF. I mean, everybody was clear. Government was very clear then when they were creating the PTF that they were going to be adding 2 naira or 3 naira, I can't remember clearly, onto the price of petroleum products per liter, and that 3 naira was going to be channeled to that fund, and they created it. So who is going to warehouse this 10 naira? Who is going to be the one collecting? How are you going to be aggregating? So these are all the issues that must be thought through. But unfortunately, the government does not even have that time anymore. I think that what should be looking at now is these 13 months or 14 months left of actual governance. To what extent are we able to consolidate, okay, on every other program? This is supposed to be a year of consolidation for me, because this is technically, if you may, okay, the last full budget that this government is going to run. And with our history of extending this budget, timing to about March of next year, it simply means that they might also extend this. So by the time you get to March, you would have only about 3 or 4 months for the government to be winding up.
Are you confident? Do you feel reassured with our current deficit, where we are, and debt to revenue ratio? It's been a problem, with something we've looked at, but looking at how we've addressed it in this budget, does it give you some confidence that we could really be able to pay back our debts comfortably?
No, it doesn't, because it's actually going to get worse, because we seem to be fixated on what's on. We're not being innovative in creating new things. All right? And that's why I said to you that when the president says, let's go back to the land, I don't read it as Ho and Machat. I read it as, listen, somehow we need to get more inclusive. All right? He also keeps talking about the cattle routes. and the cattle reserves. I also do not see it as herdsmen, carrying sticks and walking, cattle through people's farms and through brushes. I also think it has to also do with putting some kind of innovation and technology to be able to support it. These are areas, I mean, the cattle economy is about 30 trillion. And I can just give you, on a daily basis, what we earn from the cattle trade is about 4 billion. And I'm talking about forced sale value. I can do the maths for you. If we are doing 40,000, and this is even inside the southern part of the country, and I'm looking at a forced sale value of 100,000 naira for one head of cattle. If you're doing 40,000 a day, which is what statistics show that we're consuming in southern Nigeria, it is 4 billion on a daily basis. But there is no infrastructure, and this is where, when you talk about infrastructure, you don't manage infrastructure. You either have infrastructure or you don't have it. Okay, infrastructure has to be complete. It's like we're in this studio now, and then we say, okay, fine, let us even sit in the studio, and then they are still connecting the microphones. Nobody's going to hear us. We can sit in here and talk all we want. If you don't have, the cameras being able to beam, and those satellites are there, and you now have power to be able to make certain that it gets into your central transmitter, nobody's going to hear us. So when we're talking about infrastructure, it's not something you say, oh, it's work in progress. All right? You either have an infrastructure development program, and then against it, now begin to now plan how you can start increasing your revenues. And as long as you don't have it, you're going to be singing to the choir. So this is, I think, where at the heart of the matter.
Let's quickly take this to Lagos now.
Well, okay, thank you. Mr. Rikeme, I'm sure you are itching to respond to some of the things that Dr. Okengwu has spoken to.
Yeah, I think I concur 100% with his analysis. The reality is that something needs to be done to transform the direction of things. If you look at the 2021 budget, you would discover that in terms of performance of expenditure, the government was doing about 94%. But in terms of revenue, the government was doing about 74%. What that means is that the deficit which they estimated for 2021, that deficit and that gap increased because the revenue performance was 74%, but the expenditure performance was 94%. So it means that revenue is not performing as well as expenditure.
Is that a question mark? My apologies for butting in. Is that a question mark on the revenue collecting agencies, or it's a question mark on the fact that we seem to prefer to spend more than to collect?
Yeah, so spending is easy. So
well,
I think that I mean, if you give me money today, I can spend it before leaving here. It's actually creating the value, which is what the analysis which I was agreeing with. If you can create the value, and particularly infrastructure, because that's where the private sector thrives. Government can do a job, and what government does is to be an enabler for the populace, the economy, the economic activity, and the private sector. So when government is creating the infrastructure and provides that infrastructure, then the private sector can thrive. And when things are easier for businesses, then it's easier for businesses to pay tax.
Okay.
And the analysis from Abuja was quite clear. If you're paying for your security, if you're paying for your transport, if you're paying for your electricity, if you're paying for every single thing, it begs the question, how is my tax performing for me? And therefore, that moral, that contract, that civil contract, where there's a moral obligation on citizens driving them to contribute to their taxes, it's not there. And therefore, you would now see a tendency more towards evasion.
Is that in any way highlighting the key assumptions of this budget, and some of the key assumptions that the budget has raised? Is that in any way putting a question mark on whether or not the budget is going to perform?
I think that that's a complicated question to answer. But if you see the track record and you look at 2021 as an example, it is very likely that from a revenue side, things needs to be done differently. And it's not just about raising taxes, right? It's not just about raising taxes. They've introduced this 10 naira per litre. They've spoken about improving, the revenue capacity. One of the things you will see in other countries, which is a structural problem with Nigeria, is that there is usually a mechanism at the central level to identify and collect taxes at the individual or personal level. So while in Nigeria, the personal income taxes are administered at the state level, in other countries, it is administered centrally, or at least a portion of it. So if you look at the United States, for example, you'd have the federal taxes and the state taxes. So every individual is in the IRS database, but the states can then overlay a rate depending on your what we call fiscal competitiveness. So for example, people are moving into Lagos. So from that perspective, Lagos can say, well, I can introduce a state tax in addition to the federal taxes that will be high. Ogun State will say, well, I want to attract more into Ogun State, so I would reduce my tax rate less than what is in Lagos. That's what you see with Nevada, where, and the likes of Delaware, where, the states, in order to attract investment, have then taken off taxes or reduced taxes or cut taxes so that people can come in.
Is that helpful to us?
Yeah, that is instructive for us, I think. It's just that, from a structural perspective, it's difficult to change things because the Constitution already allows the states to collect, the personal income taxes. So what government then needs to do, and this is an important point because businesses are owned by individuals. So in your tax database, you must be able to identify and formalize individuals as well as properties. Once you do not have a central database that has that information, you would discover that there'll be a lot of gaps in terms of, taxing the informal sector and the semi-formal, which is the bigger problem, where people are making a lot of money, but they're not contributing.
We haven't really even been able to talk to that because one of the issues that a number of people have raised is there's that opening for the micro, small, and medium enterprises that you talked about. We haven't really been able to get them into some form of structure. There's so many issues to raise on this budget issue, but we're completely out of time. I wanted to ask, okay, maybe you can speak to this in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
How futuristic do you see 2022 budget for Nigeria? Or is it just for only 2022 and it ends in December?
So unfortunately, a budget runs for 1 year.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about this year is that it's the year before a transition. So you would discover that what the outlook for this budget will be more at establishing, something this year before the transition happens next year.
I'm actually talking about sustainability of some of the things that the budget will achieve beyond 2022.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening?
Yeah, so I don't see that happening within 1 year.
Oh dear.
Because you obviously, this is a process.
Okay.
And to transform is not easy. To get a six-pack, you have to devote time.
Don't even go there. Kenneth Erukume, tax partner, tax reporting and strategy, PwC. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And we've also spoken with Dr. Emeka Okengo, who is a development economist, chief executive officer, Anthill Concepts Limited. He is also former member, National Technical Working Group Committee of Vision 2020 project. Thank you so much, Doc, for your time this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So, okay, our messages?
Well, I'm looking forward to them. I was hoping that you'll be able to start with some of them. Perhaps our producer can help us with some of them on our screen.
Well, one has already come in. That's Festus Akimboyewa, who says about the budget 2022 breakdown, FG must be bold to remove oil subsidy. We didn't get to this. Saudi Arabia increased the price of fuel because they had $112 billion budget deficit, yet they have functional refineries. Furthermore, the amount budgeted for education and health must not be diverted. We also want to see effective investment in human capital development that will give our young people pathway to success.
And famous Timilei has this one talking about budget breakdown as well. Government should look inwards, at least into provision of social amenities. For government to only think of increasing taxes, it's like reaping where they did not sow.
Tolu Adefi on Nigeria's infrastructure development says, while we give the rebuilding of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway to the Buhari administration, a lot is still to be desired regarding the Ibadan-Ilorin axis of the road network in that part of the country. The dualization of this section of the road linking the southwest to the north-central remains largely uncompleted. The part done, Ibadan to Oyo and Ogbomoso to Ilorin, are somewhat in a state of disrepair, while the Oyo to Ogbomoso section is still under construction about 2 decades after its commencement. The road started by the Obasanjo regime is still largely uncompleted. President Buhari should please look into this.
And Isimikaye Taiwo, talking about terrorism, says, better late than never. Our military should now be up and doing in the north to give citizens the good life and security. And I believe foreign assistance may be welcome.
Titus says about the same issue, declaring bandits as terrorists is a welcome development. But Boko Haram and ISWAP have been declared as terrorists since. But they are still doing what they want.
Well, it's an observation, and perhaps you would say a valid one at that. Thank you so much for sending in your mails and your messages this morning, and for watching as well. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
Don't forget, you can still catch that interview with the president on our website, channelstv.com. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.